So let's get into it. You grew up in an entrepreneurial house. Your dad was an entrepreneur. And at 16, you drop out of high school and you start to pursue these entrepreneurial pursuits. And eventually that led you to Shipt. So where did that idea come from?
So the idea from Shipt came from my own frustration with having to wait on things to be delivered. If you think back about 6, 7 years ago, if 2-day delivery was considered fast, and I originally started Shipt to offer same-day delivery for big box retailers. That was my initial idea.
And then that obviously transitioned to what we know today with grocery stores and, of course, being acquired by Target and some incredible success. But it wasn't always this way. Take us back to 2014 when this idea that you had for Shipt wasn't gaining the traction you thought. And by the end of 2014, you thought about just calling it quits.
I did. So my initial idea was we would provide same-day delivery from retailers like Target. Target was actually the first company that I wanted to work with, but other companies like Best Buy and et cetera. And what I found was a chicken egg problem. So I would call these huge retailers and say, "Hi, I'm Bill Smith, and I'm starting a same-day delivery company. Would you be interested in partnering with me?" And you can imagine the answer was, "Who are you?" And we have everything figured out. We don't need your help. And so it was very slow start. Fast forward a few months to the end of 2014. It was actually December, and I was looking around thinking, man, I'm going to have to close this thing down. I'm going to have to let go of all my employees. I probably had 10 people at that point. And that weekend, my wife and I went to the grocery store for the first time with a 1-year-old and a newborn. And we quickly figured out that grocery shopping was a huge pain with little kids. And in the parking lot of the Publix, I looked at my wife and I said, I'm going to start delivering groceries with Shipt, and I'm going to solve this problem. And that's what led to Shipt ultimately becoming a success.
Wow. Well, every great entrepreneur sees a problem and they go, I think I can do better. We can solve this. And that's exactly what you did with this company. But it wasn't always easy, as you described. I mean, there's times when you're in this business and you're going, this ain't it. I thought it was going to take off like lightning. And as we've seen with many great companies, it can take a while to find that traction. How did you eventually get that traction where you went, okay, this is going to work?
So the first thing I wanted to do is see if anybody cared about my idea of getting groceries delivered. I was a little burned by my initial idea not taking off, and that idea didn't take off because of the supply side, the big retailers. On the grocery side, my number one focus was consumers, and I wanted to prove, will people pay for this? Shipt started initially as a membership-based company, so everybody paid $99 per year for unlimited same-day delivery. And what I wanted was 1,000 people to pay me up front for a year before we wrote the first line of code for Shipt.
Wow.
And so I put together this video and a little walkthrough of what it could look like. We put it up on a website. We did a little local marketing, and I was able to get 1,000 people in Birmingham to sign up for a year before I even built it.
That's incredible. So the idea here was, let's start small and let's have some proof of concept before we go build this massive thing that no one cares about. And you did exactly that in Kickstarter fashion, which is really cool.
Exactly. Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. So how big of a risk did you think it was when you pivoted from big box delivery to grocery? 'Cause that's a pretty big shift as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it was a big risk. At that point, I had already invested, I think, about probably maybe $500,000 in Shipt up to the point that I initially had this idea. And, I could have just moved on. I could have taken the write-off, started something else, tried to figure something else out, but I thought there was something there. And so I pushed forward with this idea, and we saw so much demand early on. I knew I was onto something. Now, we were nowhere near guaranteed to have success with only 1,000 initial members. We ended up having over 1 million members when the company was acquired. But we did have that little start, and I believed that there was something there, and ultimately it all played out really well in our favor.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you were stressed out early on, but you didn't throw in the towel on this idea. What did that force you and your team to do? What was kind of the next steps as you started to pivot and go, all right, we know we weren't doing it how we should be doing it. What are the next steps you took?
Yeah. So the first step I wanted to take is to see if there was a financial model that actually worked for this. It's everybody wants groceries delivered, but can I actually make this work in a way where it will ultimately be a profitable company at scale? And so I spent a lot of time just figuring out the unit economics of how much we'd have to charge per order and what the minimum order needed to be and what we'd pay our shoppers to make deliveries and all the other costs. So I spent time on that. And then we spent a lot of time solving the technology and operational problems. One of the most unique problems with starting Shipt was actually knowing what was in the grocery store. So the typical grocery store has about 50,000 items, and none of that information is available online. There's nowhere to go and just download what's in a typical grocery store. And so we had to figure out how to solve that. And we got really creative. We had people with shopping carts and GoPros going through the store and making videos of every aisle. And then we had
Wow.
a bunch of people that were going through all these images and creating products in our catalog. So we had a lot of complicated operational problems we had to solve before we could launch the product.
That's really impressive. I can't even imagine tackling a problem of that magnitude and scale, but as an entrepreneur does, you figure it out and you got really creative and it worked. So you are not the only person that was in this space. We got to talk about Instacart. They show up on the scene. Did that stress you out? When was the day you realized, okay, this is a competitor in the space. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's what we're going to do.
So a friend of mine sent me an article actually, and it was about Instacart having announced. I think they had raised $200 million when I initially found out about them, and so I thought, man, this company's raised a lot of capital, and here I am. I had not raised any outside money. I was only using my own capital at this point. But the opportunity was that Instacart was focused only on the coasts at that time. So they were a New York, San Francisco company. And I saw this massive opportunity in the middle of the country. And ultimately, where Shipt became hugely successful, now they're both national companies. But I think if you looked at the data, you would probably find that Shipt is the number one player in most of the markets that are in the middle of the country, the Southeast, the Southwest, the Midwest. Those are markets where Shipt was able to really grow and become the number one player. And that's how we ultimately were able to win.